Then we'll go ahead and call the September 14th, 2020 Board of Education meeting to order. If everybody can say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag
of
the
the
United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome everybody tonight. We're going to do a quick roll call of board members just to document who has joined us so far this evening. So Treasurer East.
Here.
Secretary Wheeler.
Here.
Trustee Maury.
Here.
Trustee Mashad.
Here.
Trustee Collins.
Here.
And then this is Vice President Polverento, and I know that President Lemmer, I don't know if she's joined yet. Right. She was running a little bit late and she'll be joining us as soon as she can. So the next item on our agenda is correspondence. Secretary Wheeler, can you report on what we've received the past few weeks?
Yes, since our last meeting, we've received email correspondence from Todd Krajniak and Jason Kilday regarding the return to school plan. And we received a more recent email correspondence from Abigail Asher, and she's a Wilkshire parent who wanted to commend the teachers for their outstanding teaching in our current situation.
Thank you, Secretary Wheeler. The next item on our agenda is comments from the public. So just a little bit of an introduction, and I will ask my fellow board members if I forget any of the instructions to chime in as well. But this is a period for members of the public to give comment. The board members will not respond, but instead we'll take notes and we will ask the appropriate administrator to follow up with you on the comments that are made. Everybody is limited to 5 minutes for public comment. And I've got the participant list up on my screen. If you're interested in speaking, please click the raise hand button at the bottom, and we will call on people based on the order in which they've indicated that they would like to speak. And I don't know, Mr. Casson, I'm trying to remember if people are calling in, what the directions are, or I apologize.
If they're calling in, they can send an email to our webmaster email address, which is webmaster@hazlitt.k12.mi.us.
Thank you, Mr. Casson. So I see somebody who's listed as Kelly Joe's iPhone as the first on the list. Kelly, if you can identify yourself, give your first and last name, and then you have the floor for 5 minutes. And Mr. Casson, if you can unmute, sorry.
There we go. Hi, I'm Kelly Johnston. I am a parent of a special education child who is attending Ralia. The good news is that I am thankful that you guys are finally going to start some in-person learning tomorrow for 2 hours, which is better than what we had originally been told it was going to be an hour. My concern is I just wanted it to be stated. I appreciate everything that you guys have done to try to work through this program, and that, you know, it was necessary to be online at first. However, I would like for it to be stated that my son is falling farther and farther behind with online learning. It's just not working for the special education children. He's falling further behind. He's forgotten, you know, we work with him and he's forgotten how to write K's. I know that sounds stupid, but you know, that's just a fact of our life and what we go through. He's falling farther behind. He's falling further into a little personal shell. You know, he's never had imaginary friends. Now he has imaginary friends. We need to get these children in person. And I know that regular kids are also struggling. I have friends that have children in regular education rooms, and their children are struggling also with this online. I really think we need to look at a game plan to get these children live and in school. And I do thank you guys for finally getting a plan in place for the children in special ed to start to be in person. but I just think that there needs to be a better plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next on the list is Anthony Graybosch.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Uh, I wanted to express some concerns about what I would see as potential for ethical lapses. We have the physicians who are also parents and who have attended several board meetings. Their comments are entirely without scientific merit, and they've advised the board in Moss. If the group had a name, I would propose Physicians for Pandemic Escalation, that a return to in-person school is a good idea, and that saying no to it is a form of subrational behavior and hysteria. Nothing could be further from the actual truth. But my concern is that I because of my education and my experience with people who become physicians and people who are physicians, I understand what they do and don't know. I understand that with some exceptions. I had a knee surgeon who was number theorist, much respect to him. They're quantitatively weak. I looked at the work of the people who commented. One of them did a risk modeling project that is something I would give to an intern over like a period of a week. Otherwise, I saw no experience related to risk modeling. One of them stated, after hearing from a much better colleague who advised against return to in-person school, that her position was the medical position. In other words, the unique position. She was a surgeon. I'm sure she's a good surgeon. An opinion from a surgeon who doesn't have experience in risk modeling about whether it's safe for the public health to open the school during a pandemic means as much to me as an opinion from my mechanic about the same question. Doesn't mean anything. The knowledge of treatment and the knowledge of the natural history of the thing are certainly valuable, but they're of no value in determining the correct action. My fear regarding ethical lapse is I imagine myself as like a paraprofessional, maybe a secretary, who doesn't have the benefit of my understanding of, you know, the holes in the backgrounds of the nice physicians who are advising that other people take risks, and having a concern about being in the building, and then having someone who, to be fair, can give advice about how to mitigate risk. They're performing treatment, and so far things are okay. Maybe that's in part because we're not in flu season yet, and in part because we've had the quarantine, and in part because, like, you could eat off the floor of their emergency room. My money's on the first two, but maybe some on the last one. So some value from their advice. But if I'm a paraprofessional and I'm concerned, and they're advising me on how to mitigate risk, and they say, oh, don't worry, you know, don't listen to the hysteria, that seems a lot like bullying to me. I mean, somebody making $30,000, $40,000 a year with, you know, no bachelor's degree maybe, or a bachelor's degree that doesn't give them the ability to get a job outside the school system, standing up to the status of a physician, even one who isn't a scientist and is, you know, maybe giving advice outside of their scope, would be hard to stand up to. So I certainly think that there is a class of people who maybe have children who absolutely need in-person education. I would call upon the board to find people who are willing to volunteer to offer in-person education and to guarantee that no employees of the Hazlitt Public School District will be put in the position where they have to either believe notional or nonsensical claims regarding the risk they're exposing themselves to, or risk their employment. I mean, these are people who have educated our children for a long time. Are we willing to risk their safety for our convenience? Some things can be fixed after the fact. I mean, people fall behind all the time. You know, one year you have a good teacher, one year you have a bad one. Maybe something goes wrong. If somebody buys the farm, you can't fix that after the fact. So I'm just concerned about the ethics of this, and you know, being stuck mostly at home, I I listened to the last Reagan Carter debate the other day, and I was amused by how in 40 years almost nothing has changed other than the perception of a common external enemy. And I like Reagan. I give him a B. But
Dr.
I
Posh, I just want to let you know you've got about 30 seconds.
Okay. Long story short, Reagan had the famous caricature of like a welfare mother. If we are willing to choose other people's risks for them, and they're people whose like income is like a seventh or a tenth of ours or something, how is our sense of entitlement any different? I mean, are we acting correctly if we put people in a situation where they feel compelled by their employment to take a risk they wouldn't otherwise choose? Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next on the list is Rachel Giddings.
Hello. I just wanted to echo what Kelly said earlier regarding special education. I too have a child in special education who also attends Ralia. He is a fourth grader, and I also wrote an email to, it was addressed to the superintendent, the president of the board, and the new special ed director on Friday. I did have a conversation with Jim earlier this afternoon, so I do have some questions answered. But the reason I'm here tonight is to first applaud. Yes, I echo the other comment from the public about the teachers in general and how great they've done. I'm able to sit with my son during his general education time, and I see how smooth and nice things run, all things considered. It's great. That being said, there's nothing like that on the special education side at this point. As Kelly mentioned, we did get word that they're going to start allowing our children to come in for an hour or two starting tomorrow, which is great. It's a first great step. But I think the frustration comes because this hasn't already been planned out, or so it seems. It seems like our children are always an afterthought for planning. And I applaud, again, the general education side and all the planning and efforts that went into that from people that sit on the board, the administration staff, the teachers. You can tell there was a lot of thought and good planning going behind that schedule. Unfortunately, that's not being seen on the special education side. And I'm not going to speak for all schools and for all buildings. I can only share with my experience at Ralia. I also think a part of this frustration is because it's the perfect storm of lots of new players. We've got a new special education teacher. The autism teacher left. We've got a new special ed director. We're in the middle of a pandemic and virtual learning that it's all new. So while that's all understandable, I think a lot of us parents, I'm speaking on behalf of some, we're all just frustrated. We have lots of questions, little answers. And so I stress and urge you to hear my thought on communication and how very important that is for all of us right now. We are all feeling so left in the dark. And honestly, I will be honest in telling you, little bits of my conversation will be transferred to other moms that I talk to so that I can share what I've learned and vice versa. And it's just not a good way to go about it. We're all hearing it through the grapevine. And we're each being told slightly different things because of course we all have different questions. So it's just extremely hard. I did express the same concern and many more actually to Jim this afternoon. So I do hope that there will be some action taking place. But I wanted to make sure that while I commend everybody for their efforts with what they're doing for this really strange school year of a time with virtual learning, it is also extremely hard on the special education side right now being a parent and for the children. So I just want to stress how important it is if we can just get the communication better for us parents so we know how to help our children and what to do going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on the list is Jason Kilday. Mr. Casson, are we able to unmute Mr. Kilday?
I've sent him the request to unmute. I will try again.
Thank you.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, sorry about that. It might have been on my end. A couple things. First of all, I would like to address the gentleman that spoke, I think it was first or second. It was second, regarding none of our opinions matter and his is the only one that does matter. I'm sorry, I'm going to listen to doctors and people that are actually in the line of duty through this whole pandemic first, before I'm going to listen to some academic type sit at home and give his opinions because he's been reading and watching the news. Second of all, we have to take in big consideration what's going on out there. And I would like to ask is, and I know that you guys can't answer it right now, but is the board polling the teachers to see how it's going from their end? What sort of feedback are they getting from the students, from the parents, and how do they feel this is going? I'd really like to know if the board plans on polling the teachers to look at that situation. Second of all, I'm really interested in understanding where we're at with the construction, because while I heard that early on that wasn't an issue for maybe not going back to school, now I understand that we're delayed, which maybe happened after the school start date started. Mr. Cook did respond to me, but I still don't understand, like, when is it expected for the construction to be at a stage where if we are able to go back to school, will the schools be ready? And then last of all, there is no parent out there happier that the Hazlitt, administration and staff has decided to allow kids to play the fall sports. I think that's a very great thing, a much needed thing for everybody given this time, that especially those that enjoy playing sports. However, I do think we have to take a strong look at, if we're allowing sports to be played, how are we not allowing kids back in some sort of classroom setting? So I appreciate what everybody's done to date. I know this is not easy. I know it's a changing environment. I really do appreciate the communication back from the board on the several emails I've sent. However, I really, really still hope that we are somehow working to get back to school in a format here, soon after October 12th. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next on the list is Trevor Goldberg.
Am I up?
Yes, you are.
Nice, thank you. I think most of you guys know me, but like Mr. Kilday, I'm gonna quote something here. I'm gonna read this right from the CDC website. It says, steps to help prevent the spread of COVID. If you are sick, stay home except to get medical care. Stay home. Most people with COVID-19 have mild illness and can recover at home without medical care. Do not leave your home except to get medical care. Do not visit public areas. It doesn't tell you how long you got to quarantine yourself on here. Take care of yourself. Get rest and stay hydrated. Take over-the-counter medicines such as acetaminophen to help you feel better. Stay in touch with your doctor. Avoid public transportation. That's what the CDC says right on their website. Now, in terms of the other parents, the special needs parents, man, you guys are being far too kind, because before school was determined we would not go back to school, 67% of us voted to go back to school in one way or another in person. The superintendent decided to not listen to his constituents and not return to school. But just before that, he gave the contractors a 60-day extension. Why was that? Because the reason why that is because he was counting on COVID-19 to give him time to finish the projects, and they're still not finished yet. So these kids, my special needs kid and other kids who are in higher, if they're in higher grade, we'll put it that way, in AP classes, sorry, they're struggling. So it means this plan we have in place is ridiculous. The kids are learning. They're getting synchronous learning an hour per week with their teacher, and another hour asynchronous learning. We're paying for 5 hours a day, 5 hours a week per teacher. We're paying for that. And don't get me wrong, if you teachers are listening out there, I am so pro teacher. We have amazing teachers. We do. Trevor's new math teacher this year is absolutely amazing. They're amazing people. Personally, I don't think they're paid enough. And if we can afford to buy out 3 teachers' contracts at about $100,000, we can afford to pay the teachers some more. But that's not part of this issue. The issue is there's more to the story here than just we can't follow the governor's return to school guideline. So if you read her return to school guideline, which I did, it says that students must wear a mask in school. But if they can't wear a mask in school, they're not required to. Staff must wear a mask in school. If they cannot wear a mask in school, they're not required to. We can't follow that guideline to go back to school. So at the end of the day, it comes down to the construction. That's what it is. We were in the school the other day and the floors weren't done yet. Kids could not walk the hallways. The security systems aren't done yet. They've had all summer long. So my point is, though, it's a dereliction of duty on the administration's part why these kids aren't back in school. And to be honest with you guys, from the school board's for me, from the school board, you guys are just as complicit. You guys are not there to have tickle fights. You're a backstop for these students. And so what you're doing right now is you're hurting their learning on a daily basis. They're not getting what they need. So you want to know what? Like I said, you're complicit with what's going on, and there really needs to be some repercussion from the community, because this isn't getting it done. And I think the community needs to, I'm not sure how many people we have right now, but last one we had 20 people watching you guys on Zoom, your last meeting. That's far too little. We need way more people involved in the community to make sure these schools get back to where they used to be, the A+ schools, because they're not whatsoever. So, I'm calling out the school board. I'm calling out the administration. We get more information for free food for students from the school district than we do the return to school program. We get nothing. So that's another question too. The latest email we got was 18-year-old and under, all kids get a free lunch during this. Well, why is that? People in need, I have zero problem with that. I don't. But
Mr. Goldberg, I just want to let you know you've got about 30 seconds.
I appreciate that. Thank you. So my question about that is, and I want whatever questions I ask here, I want a written response, because I don't want to have a meeting with the superintendent so we can just talk about it. I want it in writing. But anyway, I'm going to leave it there. I'm calling you guys out. It's time for these kids to go back to school. I read you what the CDC said. Let's get it done. Thank you.
Thank you. The next person on the list is Chelsea Marble.
Hi there. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I am a parent of a 4th grader who attends Ralia. He is in the MySci program, so the mild cognitively impairment program there. And also just a little background, I am actually a speech therapist and I work for the ISD. So I have lots of background of the special ed world. I first would like to start off by saying, which I don't think anybody has addressed yet, is the lack of communication that Pam was even leaving. So I found out through word of mouth, whether it was Pam's responsibility to email us as special ed parents and let us know, or it was an administrators or superintendent, but someone should have let us know. It's very unprofessional. And I know at the ISD, that is how things are handled there. I think also when the new special ed director was hired, I think someone should have introduced him. Let us know who he is, his phone number. And I feel like that comes from administration. He is new here. He doesn't know anybody. So that was pretty upsetting and frustrating. I know for a lot of us parents who were already in a challenging situation in this pandemic, trying to figure out how this is all going to work. And then we have a new special ed director and a new special ed teacher, which Kelsey has done amazing. Summer school went very well. I thought the kids did great. They enjoyed it. It was for 2 hours a day, was great. So the other thing is a lot of what the other parents have said is our special ed kids not getting what they deserve and what they are owed. Beginning of August, the decision was made that we were going to start virtual. And I understand that. And I know it was a tough decision. A lot of school districts went with the same one. Gen Ed came out with an amazing plan. It was wonderful. And I will have to say the same, as I'm trying to persuade my child to listen in. I'm very impressed with how all the teachers are doing it. My son has Kelsey Newman, and she actually took some classes on technology, and she's made it fun, and I've really enjoyed watching her. But what frustrates me there again is we had no special ed director, a new special ed teacher. Someone was supposed to take over. Someone was supposed to be moved up and be in charge of the special ed department until the new special ed director, which I feel for him. He's only been here 2 weeks, and I actually had a wonderful conversation with him today, but he's new. Someone should have stepped in. You know, at the ISD, when we have an employee down or someone quits or resigns, the ISD says, who can step in? Who can take this role? We will pay you. Someone should have done that. So a plan could have been in place for our kids, because it felt like everyone was scrambling. And I do not blame the new teacher, and I do not blame the new special ed director. I blame the administration for not stepping in and making sure our kids were taken care of. Also, back on what I think it was Trevor just said with the construction. Why was construction given another 60 days? I know that you had decided to be virtual only, but what if we were moved up a phase? That now the kids don't even have an opportunity to come back because the buildings aren't ready. I have no parents who've been in the buildings, who's been in Ralia. There's one hallway. None of the classes are put together. So if we were to go back in a week or two, they're not ready. I just would want to know what the state would think about that, because I just have a feeling that they wouldn't be too happy to know the buildings are not ready if and when our kids should be going back. That I find this to be another frustration. I also wonder why that it's taken longer for our kids the special ed kids, to start the face-to-face. Is it because of the buildings, or is it because of safety? I don't know. Also, I know at the ISD, our superintendent has been pushing face-to-face from the get-go. He actually, right before Labor Day, came out with a meeting and said, our numbers in Ingham County are good. We were at 2%. We were one of the best in the state. So our county is doing great.
Sorry, I just want to let you know I have 30 seconds.
Okay, thank you. And he, there actually was a case, people may know, that happened at the Career Center. And you know what he said? It's going to happen. Outbreaks are going to happen, but we know the importance of face-to-face learning. So I just urge you to please keep working on a better plan for these special ed kids, and also for all gen ed kids. They need to be in school. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on the list, there's Amanda Laraga.
Hello.
Hello.
I am the mom to 4 children. 3 of my kids are school aged, and 2 gen ed children, and I do also have a child with special needs. So I just want to say this has been completely overwhelming for me as a parent. Everybody is doing the best they can. I understand that. But I just having the 3 kids on at the same time has been just really almost impossible. My 2 gen ed students have both had breakdowns in front of their class on screen, crying because one of us parents wasn't there to help them and they couldn't figure out the technology, and then they were very embarrassed afterwards. And it's mostly because I have to constantly sit with my child with special needs on either her gen ed class or her special education class on Zoom, because she will not sit there, and we have to almost force her or bribe her to sit there, which is just completely inappropriate and it's not developmentally appropriate for her. And she is not really getting anything out of it. She's not getting all the services that are listed in her IEP. And I just want to echo all the things that the other special education parents said. There has just been little to no communication about staff changes. About 25% of the emails I send, they just get ignored and they don't even get answered. And I'm just frustrated and not hearing what's going on. We only just heard recently that our children would be back at school, and it's really just for a couple of hours, which is a good start. But like others have said, other districts have been doing this for a week or 2 now and have more robust schedules for their children, and even have support for those special needs students in the gen ed curriculum, which I haven't heard anything about from Hazlitt. And so I just want to say it's been really stressful for me. I'm working full time as well as my husband from home, and I've had to take an emergency time off of work because I have not been able to handle this and to make sure all my kids are doing what they need to do at the right time and try to be there for my child that really is barely participating in anything and is really struggling to get anything out of this Zoom. So I just want to say it is hard out here. I'm really looking forward to when these kids can come back because this is really kind of unsustainable for our family. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any more hands raised. Mr. Casson, have we had anything come in for people who are calling in?
No, there are no emails to the webmaster account.
Thank you. So seeing no other hands, we'll go ahead and close public comment. Thank you to everyone, and we will move to the superintendent's report.
Thank you, Vice President Polverento. Just a couple things this evening. First of all, congratulations to our staff on a successful start to the new year. As mentioned, we did start 100% online, but I think our teachers have done a great job getting ready and prepared for online learning. We are going to be doing a survey later this week out to parents and to our staff to make sure that we can get feedback with regarding how things are going. So I just wanted to make that point, but congratulations to our staff to the start of the school year. The next item is a construction update. I'm going to actually defer that until my presentation later in the presentation. But the last item is that we are recommending that the Hazlitt Board of Education approve the proclamation commemorating the 233rd anniversary of the drafting of the Constitution of the United States of America. Public Law 915 guarantees the issuing of a proclamation each year by the President of the United States designating September 17th through the 23rd, 2020 as Constitution Week. And we will be approving that later in the agenda. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Superintendent Cutt. So we'll move next to the first of our discussion items, which is the extended COVID-19 learning plan.
So this is actually part one of part two of our plan. Tonight we'll talk about the goals because those are due this week, and then at our next board meeting we'll do the full extended plan that we will have approved by the ISD. So you can move that slide, Steve. So we have two goals, and after consulting with the ISD on our goals, the recommendation is that we keep our goals very vague when we start. And the reason for that is because the legislation has allowed that our benchmark testing has to be done in the first 9 weeks. But these goals were due by the 15th of September. So it's hard to establish goals with percentages in that when you don't have all your benchmark testing done. So they've just told us to write them very vague, and they gave us templates to use for the beginning one. But then when we update at mid-year, which will be in January, we will have more defined goals based on our fall data and what we've been working on through our MTSS program. So goal number one simply states all students K-8 will improve performance in reading ELA from fall to spring as measured by NWEA. We will be using NWEA as our measure this year. In the past, we've used Acadience testing, but we're going to transfer it over to NWEA to get a more thorough look at our students because of the gap from the spring, and to make sure that we are addressing all the needs of students. Two pieces of our goal: all teachers will use formative assessments to adjust instructional teaching strategies and to support meaningful student progress towards mastery of reading and ELA academic standards. And the results from our reading and ELA benchmark assessments, our local summative assessments, and our formative assessments, those are all things that we normally do in our MTSS program, will be continuously discussed and analyzed by staff. For goal number two, it's basically the same goal, only for mathematics. We always have these goals for math and for ELA every year. They're just more defined, like I said, because we have a little more time to get our data from fall. We're also just slightly unsure of where our kids are going to land because of the spring assessment. So that's why they're just recommending start vague and then use your baseline data to set your goals. So our math and our ELA goals are relatively the same right now. Our process, thanks, Steve. Our process for moving forward is very similar to what we've always done. We're using our assessment results that will be analyzed by our coaches and our classroom teachers, and they will collaborate with grade level teams and department teams to discuss the data and establish both our intervention programs and design schedules for students. The parents will be notified of assessment results once those are completed, and also of student placements if they qualify for interventions of any type. And then our groups will be adjusted as needed based on their progress toward individual goals. To monitor the progress of students, our special education students and our at-risk students, which are in our MTSS program, our progress monitored every 2 to 3 weeks using Acadience and Ames Web progress monitoring tools. We use those every school year. Our teachers will regularly assess our students during classroom activities and use data from the assignments that they are submitting. And then our benchmark testing, even though the state legislation says that we only have to do 2 benchmarks, we are going to continue with our normal practice of 3 benchmarks, fall, winter, and spring, based on our typical protocol for MTSS. The next slide is, this is the sheet that we have to use to report our goals at mid-year and at the end of the year. And if you'll notice on the bottom, we also have to, at mid-year, disaggregate our data into subgroups and look at more specific goals in those areas as well. And again, it's for reading and math, and it's only K-8 students that we have to report goals on. And that's basically our goals for this year in those 2 areas. Does anyone have any questions?
Susan, not necessarily a question, but perhaps a comment, just to remind members of the public who are listening in now that these goals have been developed in response to a piece of legislation that was just enacted in August.
Correct.
And we were given very little time to respond to it and had to wait for there to be even some sort of guidance from the state on what we needed to do, and that having to spend some time on this has diverted some of the staff and administrator time to putting together these goals in order to be able to present them up to us and to submit them to the ISD.
That's correct, yeah.
Susan, I know we're not required to do any high school goals, but do we do any kind of assessment, or are we planning any kind of assessment and monitoring for our high school students?
We normally assess all of our students that are in Algebra 1 and our 9th graders that are in geometry. Algebra 1 and geometry is basically where we do NWEA. And in the algebra course, those students also take the reading, because the reading piece is important to algebra and application problem solving type of problems. So they do both of those. And then we typically in high school use our PSAT data, but we did not have that from last year. And so, and we're not sure what that's going to look like yet this year. So that's our measure that we usually use. Yeah, but we will still use our local assessments. Teachers are still giving either a modified version of their common assessments or like unit or module tests to assess students as they move through each unit in the class.
Yeah, again, with losing last spring, I just wanted to make sure that we pointed out that we don't ignore those high schoolers, that we're still trying to make sure we identify those who might be having some challenges.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
Susan,
and I see that Tammy has joined. I just want to let everybody know Tammy has joined too.
Okay. Susan, this is Greg here. There are a couple of questions that were thrown at me here that regarding those initial benchmark assessments through K through 8. Mm-hmm. And that there's some frustrations by some parents out there that the level of the knowledge in those assessments was stuff that the students hadn't quite learned. I don't know, can you just give a quick rundown of how that initial benchmark assessment works in the school district, please?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting that you would say that things they haven't learned. So we're using NWA, which is a an assessment that will level a student. We can find out actually where they're at. So if a student is extremely bright, they will at some point max themselves out because the test just gets harder and harder and harder. And a lot of times students that tend to excel in at a grade level, they will get everything right. But this test is designed to continuously move them up the ladder until they kind of max out. So it will move by grade level. They actually go up grade levels instead of staying in their own grade level. So yeah, students that normally do well will struggle. And when we first started giving that assessment in the middle school about 5 years ago, we had to teach our students that at some point you're just not going to be able to answer it anymore, and that's okay. And once they understood that, you know, we just said take your best educated guess and move on. But the other thing it does for us is that we can identify the gap areas for students and really hone in on those things that we missed in the spring. So that's the other reason we're using that assessment.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
This is Tammy, and I apologize. I have been on the meeting and was able to hear, I believe, all of the public comment, but I do apologize to my colleagues and the public for being late, and I thank Vice President Paul Varento for facilitating the meeting this evening. But I wanted to follow up on Karen, Trustee East's point, it's kind of just to reiterate that we are already doing assessments. We already do assessments as a district every year. We're in fact going to continue to do the assessments, which is more than the legislation requires. But what the legislation is requiring us, most importantly, you as administrators and staff, is to pull together a completely different report than the ones you are already required to do. You had to create a completely different plan above and beyond what you were already prepared or required to do, both in terms of COVID response as well as academic rigor and achievement and assessment. So I just want to acknowledge that and again, make it crystal clear to the community and to the public that you have all as administrators and staff been continually asked to do more and more and more. And in this instance, very short notice with legislation that was passed very quickly with, as you said, no guidance or very little guidance. So I just wanted to thank you all for the work that you're doing to pull this together.
And Susan, it's Tracy. I want to make sure too that I know that I have 2 students at the middle school, and I received communication that the NWA will be given and there were dates given out. Can you maybe remind us of the dates of those? Do you have those, or are they going to go out again? Just as a reminder, because I know it's coming up soon.
Yeah, I don't have the exact dates in front of me, but I can definitely let you know that. Yeah.
Okay. Just a gentle reminder as we get a little bit closer for all of us who are getting, you know, all of that information. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, I think we're good.
Yep.
Ms. Palbrenta, did you want to continue or do you want me to pick up from here?
You can go ahead.
Okay. Gee, thanks.
Funky handoff. Sorry for that.
No problem. So we will move on to discussion item number 2, which is our COVID-19 preparedness and response plan.
Okay, that's me. Hold on here. I'm trying to share my screen here. Okay, here we go. All right, does everybody see that?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, great. So I wanted to share where we're at with regard to our responsive return plan, essentially bringing students back into the buildings. First of all, I just wanted to review what the criteria that we've been using with regard to our decision to return to face-to-face instruction. First and foremost is the current My Start phase that we're in our region. We are currently in phase 4, and we are allowed in phase 4 to bring kids back into the buildings, assuming that we can meet the safety protocols in place. And I'll go over those in just a few minutes. But number 2 is our ability to meet the safety protocols in the return to school roadmap, as we've talked about at prior meetings. In addition to that, we are also looking at the COVID-19 data in our area, in our region. Is it at an acceptable level? And I'm going to share with you some data that we've now gotten from our local health departments. They've actually come out with a document to assist districts in making that decision. It does not ultimately give us the decision, but it gives us some guidance in determining whether we believe that the data for COVID-19 in our area or our region is at an acceptable level. And the last piece is the ability to offer remote learning option. Obviously, we started that way 100%. I want to reiterate our thanks to our teachers for all the work that they did to get that up and running. But this is a big piece that people don't, some people don't necessarily understand, that regardless if we do bring kids back face-to-face, we still have to have the ability to do remote instruction, whether that's with a certain percentage of our folks or we go to a hybrid method where we're not in class full-time. So it's really important that we have that up and running and that we're really good at that, because if we do return to face-to-face instruction and we have to close a building or something for whatever reason, that we have that piece in place. And so one of the reasons that we did make the decision to go online 100% to start was that piece, is that we wanted to make sure that we had a viable remote learning plan in place. And at least the feedback that we've gotten so far has been positive with regard to that issue. So the next issue I want to address, and we've had some questions about this with regard to construction, so I want to clear up the air on this. First of all, I had some questions with regard to the decision to go online. Was that decision made because of construction? And so as I've reiterated to the people that have asked me that question, when we made that decision, or when I made that recommendation on August 3rd, construction was not the issue with regard to whether we went 100% online. Have we had some issues since then? Yeah, absolutely. And I'll talk a little about those in just a minute. But we do have temporary occupancy for all our buildings, meaning we can bring staff and students into our building. We actually received that status the week before school started. So we do have the ability to bring kids back into the building. All of our instructional classrooms are completed. They were actually completed the first week of school, with the exception of the 4th and 5th grade wings at Murphy. Those were not completed the first day of school, but they have since been completed. So all of our classrooms are ready for instruction. Everything is completed in those areas. Our network is up and running and everything's going. We do have quite a few teachers that are teaching from their classroom. We still have some minor touch-up items in those classrooms, but for the most part, all of our classrooms are ready to go. One of the big areas that we did have some challenges with was flooring. As was pointed out, flooring in our hallways is not 100% completed yet, or in our lunchrooms, but that's in progress right now, and we hope to have that completed within the next several days. One of the problems that happened is we had so much flooring that we had to do for construction, and we actually hired 2 contractors to do that. We split it up for the reason because it was so large, but unfortunately in the end we did have some challenges regarding to getting all the flooring done, and unfortunately that led to a domino effect of other things that got delayed, because flooring, before you can put in furniture, you have to have flooring down. Before you can move in boxes and things like that, you have to have your flooring down. So that did cause some last minute delays with regard to our construction plan. Our restrooms are still being renovated, although we do have operational restrooms in all the buildings, but they will be completed by the end of this week. We still have punch list items in all of our buildings, but that will take place over the next 2 weeks. And we hope to have all of our construction completed by the end of September, with the exception of the high school gym, which was not scheduled to be completed until January. So all of our classrooms are ready to go. We still have some flooring that needs to be completed in the buildings that I've mentioned, but pretty much we're ready to go with regard to the building status. And when we got into bidding out these contracts back in the spring, we did allow the flooring contractors back then, which is when we awarded the contracts a week or two after school started because there was so much flooring to be done. We wanted to make sure that they had enough time to do that. But we were hoping that they would be done before school started, but unfortunately that did not happen. So that's an update on construction.
Steve, quick question. Punch list. Can you talk about what those are?
So those are just the little things to make sure that, you know, if we have touch-up paint, that we have, you know, some of the moldings, any of the little things that we're not satisfied with, that we go through each one of the spaces and say, okay, this paint isn't where we would like to be. This molding isn't up to code. It's not up to speed. So we do have a couple weeks to do that. Most of the work, like I said, is pretty much completed. It's just those punch list items where we go through each area of each building to make sure that they're up to our standards and up to the standards of our construction manager in terms of completion. So
thank you.
And that's very common in construction projects. Some of those things may take a lot longer depending upon what they are, but for the most part, we should receive permanent occupancy, which, like I said, now we have occupancy for our building, but permanent occupancy will be obtained after all the work is completed and they give us a final write-off, sign off on all of our buildings. So I mentioned the roadmap, the safety protocols have to be in place. There are 3 levels: required, highly recommended, and recommended. Required in phase 4 have to be all in place. I'm not going to go through these, every single one of these, but we do believe that based upon all of the work that we've done over the last several weeks, that we have all of these things in place. The facial coverings will be required, adequate supplies for hygiene, screening protocols for staff and students, testing protocols if in fact we do get positive cases in our buildings. We do now have guidance from the health department as to how to handle positive cases if those should arise. Prohibiting of indoor assemblies, bringing students together in one more classroom. Athletics, MSHA guidelines are being followed. That's one of the reasons that we decided to allow contact sports. Once the governor came out with her executive order, MSHA followed with their guidelines with regard to that, and we decided to allow those sports to continue. Prior to that time, we did not have guidance on what that would look like. Unfortunately, that came at kind of the last minute, so we had to kind of scramble to get that together, but we are happy that we're allowed to bring those sports back for the fall. And then lastly, the transportation protocols need to be in place on our buses if we allow transportation.
Hey,
so the
Steve,
highly recommend.
Steve,
Yes,
can you go back one?
Yeah.
Sure.
One quick thing before you move on from this, I just want to reiterate that this is a very summary list of what is included in all the safety protocols. There are many, many bullet points under each one of these of measures that we need to take. And there are some additional things. So this is just a very brief summary list of what's included in the safety protocols. Josh?
Steve, now that we have that information from the health department, are you able to go into just, I mean, even a brief overview of what the testing protocols would be if there are any positive cases?
In terms of the building? Yeah, so they have a flow chart. The health department has come up with a flow chart. They essentially will do all the contract tracing. So once we have a positive case, they'll let us know where it's at and what the protocol would be for that particular individual that tested positive, whether we have to close down an individual classroom, whether that's a full building, whatever that looks like. It depends upon what their recommendations are in terms of those particular spaces and those particular buildings. And I'm going to go over some of the recommendations that I mentioned earlier with regard to some of the protocols they put in place with regard to making that decision.
Okay.
So, and as you mentioned, Karen, yes, we went all over the details when we presented the plan a month or so ago of all the details of this. I just wanted to kind of summarize what that looked like for each of these areas. So as you move on to the highly recommended, these are not required, but all of these things, our intent is to make sure that we can have as many of these highly recommended protocols in place before we allow students back in the building. Spacing, movement and access, social distancing, all of those things that we would have in place for that. The screening and testing, the mental and social emotional protocols, as we've talked about before, cleaning and disinfecting protocols for all of our spaces, and then adequate technology to support remote learning. And we did make the decision several weeks ago to go one-on-one, and so now all of our students do have learning devices individually for all of our students. So as I mentioned earlier, the third piece is the acceptable level of COVID data in our area. And so the state of Michigan has come out with what they call the Michigan Safe Start Plan. And part of the Ingham County recommendations, actually the health department along with the local health department association of Michigan came together with a lot of the health departments in our state and came up with some guidance for school districts with regard to making the decision to reopen. And one of the big pieces is the data in our area, which is this Michigan Start Map Info. And basically that particular website documents the number of cases per million in our county and region, and also shows the percentage positivity in our county or region. I'm gonna just see if I can do this and switch real quickly to what that site looks like. Hold on. Get out of here. Okay. All right, can everybody see that?
Yeah.
Yes.
So this is the Michigan Start Map, which basically has all of the regions in the state, and it gives the data for both test results and new cases. And so as a couple of the comments earlier talked about percentage test ratios in our area. And so if you look at the Lansing region, this is the data for our area. So right now we're currently at 3.6% for positive tests, which puts us in the medium range right here. If you look at the number of positive cases, that number has gone up quite significantly. As most of us know, MSU returning has caused a spike in that area. You can actually go to our county. And so if you look at our county data, you can see that those we're at 199.3 cases per million. And actually, if you look at this data here, you can see that just in the last, since August 24th, we've had a huge spike in cases, which has basically put us into the very high region for new cases in our area. If you look at other counties in our region, you'll see these numbers to be much lower. So this is the information, that the data that the Ingham County or the health departments have alluded to using when making that decision. We haven't defined exactly what that acceptable level is going to be for our district for these particular metrics, but at least it gives you an idea of what that looks like for each of the regions. So if you look at other regions of the state, Traverse City, obviously these numbers are much less, and that's why they're actually in phase 5. Their percentage positive rates only 2%, and their cases per million are only 20 per million. So their data is much better in terms of this website. So I'm going to go back to the presentation here, see if I can do this. So that's one of the pieces, the Michigan Start Map information in terms of the matrix that the health department has come out with. Some of the definitions they talk about are mitigation strategies that, depending upon where we're at, mitigation strategies could be either regular mitigation or strict mitigation. Mitigation, basically all the required protocols are in place. In strict mitigation, all the required and the recommended protocols need to be in place in the Michigan roadmap. And they also allude to reducing density in building, which is basically reducing the number of students in the building, which is alluding to more of the hybrid method in terms of learning. So this is the matrix that the health department came up with, and essentially it looks at the risk data. On the left here, it has the risk data from low to high. And then on the top, it talks about number of cases, whether you have no cases, absence of cases in the school building, you have known cases in the building with no ongoing transmission, or you have cases in the building with evidence of ongoing transmission. And essentially what this is doing is looking at where potentially you should be based upon these particular categories. So if we were in the low region and we had no cases, basically you're in the green here, which says in-person allowed with mitigation measures, which is essentially following the roadmap as is assigned. Obviously, as we get to a higher level within the county, they're suggesting that depending upon whether we have cases or we don't have cases, that remote instruction would be suggested for the district and these various metrics pieces here. So
Steve, given what the numbers are in the county and I know there's lots of kind of discussion about how much that should be viewed kind of outside of campus, given the large percentage of those cases that are identified as students and what that means for the larger county and how it's looked at. Well, let's say we were in that high category for the county level. Since we don't, as of now, know of any cases that would be in our buildings, it would be the reduced density. So really that hybrid model.
Correct.
With all the required and all the recommended mitigation measures.
Correct.
Okay.
However, obviously, if that changes, where we do get reported cases, that potentially could change
right.
Where we might be in terms of whether we go to hybrid or we have to go back to 100% fully online learning.
Yep. Yep.
Let's take one step back. Okay, the left-hand column that says county level risk determination, where we have the low, medium, high, whatever. It's my understanding that that is the decision of the county health officer. So the Ingham County health officer, Linda Vale, is going to be making a determination of where the county risk level lies on that scale.
Yes.
It's not a joint decision that the superintendent, you are involved in, or the whole ISD, that this decision is going to come from the county health department on what risk category we're going to be falling in.
Any other questions on the matrix itself?
I have one question. It's Tracy. Are we only looking at Ingham County? Just because our school district is kind of in a unique position where we straddle different counties. So are we only looking at Ingham County, or are we looking at the surrounding counties where our students come from too?
Yeah, so if I went back to the Michigan Start map, it actually has the region, which has all of the counties that are in ours. So we would look at both the region data and the data within Ingham County to make a decision how we would decide the data in terms of what risk level that we might be at.
Steve, to expand on that, and Tracy's point, I think one of the issues though, Tracy, is my understanding is that because all of our buildings reside in Ingham County,
we have to follow Ingham County.
The Ingham County health officer will be advising us about decisions to be made in our buildings. But when it comes to contact tracing, if a staff member or a student or someone in our building resides in Clinton or Shiawassee County and is a case, those two county health departments would have the lead on the contact tracing in that case that is resident in their county. So it is going to be a little complicated for administrators and us as we actually walk through what happens when a case occurs. But that's kind of my understanding as to how this would work.
Thank you for clarifying that.
And realize too, this is only guidance. This is not foolproof. They're not saying this is what you have to do. They're just giving us guidance in terms of helping us make that determination. So it will be ultimately our decision to make with regard to the data. So in addition to the matrix, they also talk about, they just define a little about what this means. If you're going up and down, either increase or decrease between those particular levels, it defines what they're going to use in terms of deciding whether you're going up or down in terms of those levels with regard to risk. In addition to that, they define what ongoing transmission is in a building. And I just want to back up that. So that matrix is for building by building. So you might have one building that might be in a certain situation where you have no cases. So you would be at a different level if another building had cases. So you could potentially, as you may assert, is that you could have one building that would be open, or you could have one building that might be closed, depending upon the data within that particular building. So it also defines the mitigation strategy measures, as I mentioned before, whether that's strict or regular mitigation. It also talks about density, which I talked about before, really the hybrid approach, and as such. So this is really the first guidance that we've gotten at the local county health level in terms of what the data is and how we might use that to make a decision. So this will obviously be something that we're going to have to continue to monitor as we look at making that decision to come back to face-to-face instruction.
And just, Steve, real quick, one question or maybe one comment. I know you've got ongoing transmission here, and I think it's important to point out that the health department will get notification of positive cases, but then they'll be looking at the school to help them understand what students and staff that case may have come in contact with to aid them in their contact tracing, correct? So it's going to be important on us to understand how our students and staff are moving throughout the building once we bring them back. And so that's part of why the school day is going to look different when students are there and when we have more people in the building, is partially to be able to control some of that and have a better understanding of where everybody's at.
Correct.
Yes, Molly's absolutely right about that, because the local health department is going to be actually calling the potential contacts. We're the school districts, the buildings are going to be responsible for identifying who those contacts might be, and also helping the local health department understand the degree to which households will be across buildings, whether it's a staff person or a student. Individual households could be in many of our buildings as they work on understanding the whole contact issue and what is confined to a household and what is in fact building transmission.
So the next steps are as follows. My plan is to bring a recommendation to the board at the next meeting in terms of recommendation moving forward. Whether that has a timeline associated with that, I'll talk about that in just a second, but we also will need to resurvey our parents to determine how many families still want to return to a hybrid model. As has been pointed out, when we did our original survey, we had about 2/3, 1/3. That could be higher or lower. We're not certain. We just want to make sure that we have accurate numbers so that when and if we go back to a hybrid model, that we have accurate numbers by building and by class level, if any families or students have changed one way or the other. So we have to finalize our responsive return plan, which essentially is the hybrid model. We pretty much have that in place right now, so we just have to do some tweaking. If we do go back to face-to-face instruction, we already have our schedule laid out so that, and one of the reasons that we did that is so that that we knew that at some point when we come back, it would probably be in a hybrid model, and that we would want our schedules to align to that way so that we don't have to move students around in terms of their class or their teacher. So the last piece would be developing a timeline for implementing this. We would probably likely have about a 2-3 week phase-in period. We'd probably bring in our younger learners first and then phase in more of our secondary students later. So that will be part of the plan that I bring forth at the next meeting. But essentially, whatever that plan might be, whether that's a 2-week or a 3-week phase-in, that potentially could move depending upon the health data for our region. So we have the plan in place, we have everything ready to go, then we just need to determine whether or not the health data supports us to come back to face-to-face instruction in a hybrid model. So if for some reason, that data changes significantly, we could push that plan out a week or two, or we could go in either direction in terms of implementing that timeline moving forward. But we want, now that we at least have a metric now from the health department, that at least give us some information that we can help in making that decision moving forward. But I want to make sure that we have the plan in place and we have a timeline of what that would look like. So when and if we're going to pull the trigger on doing that, that we can just basically give the dates of when that's going to happen and move forward. So hopefully that makes sense. Any questions with regard to that?
Yeah, Steve, I do, because I'm just trying to understand how the timeline for implementing it kind of works within the plan, because part of me needs to lay the groundwork or leave an opening for potentially needing to suspend in-person learning in a classroom, in a building, potentially in the district, even after we return to in-person learning. There's all kinds of forecasts out there about what could happen. So it almost seems as if that timeline and the steps we need to take to implement in-person learning are almost kind of like a separate piece to the plan, because that may be different, or we may need to address it with each perhaps suspension of in-person learning that may come to us over the course of the year. So I just wonder if we just need to be alert, or just think about the fact that the how we go back to in-person learning might be one way this first time, and it might be different every other time we encounter it.
Correct.
Well, and I think it's important to say we will have somebody who comes into our school buildings. I mean, my guess is that there will be somebody who comes into our buildings that are asymptomatic and positive. And so I think it's, for me, the really critical piece is having that flexibility. So if we get a report of a positive case, how do we respond to what the health department's guiding us to do? How do we help with the contact tracing? But the other piece of that is making sure we've got all those safety pieces in place before our students come back and our teachers are back full time. Just making sure, you know, that the expectations are clear with masks and washing your hands and social distancing, and just that's communicated in lots of different ways and lots of different times to everybody, so that the expectations are very clear.
Any other questions on the next steps?
You talked about, it's Tracy. You talked about 2 different surveys. So this week we're going to get the polling of teachers, parents, and students of how the online piece is going. And then the resurvey would come after your recommendation at the next board meeting?
No, we would do that probably sometime this week just to make sure that the data that we had before is still in line with what we had, so that when we develop our cohorts in a hybrid learning plan, that the numbers support that, which, you know, based upon what we had before, we believe we can do that. I don't think that's going to change significantly, but I assume that there are some parents that have decided one way or the other, either they want to continue on the online or they want to come back, or vice versa. So we just want to make sure that when we look at building by building, that data is as accurate as we can have at that particular point. And
so
we'll
I'm sorry.
No,
so parents should expect 2 different surveys coming out by the end of this week. Okay, I understand.
Correct.
I'm putting my own timeline together too of how this all plays out. I've got it.
So now I'm confused. What are the 2 surveys?
So we have one survey that's just going to go out to parents and staff with regard to online learning. How's it going? What are the positives? What are the negatives? What can we do to improve? And we talked about doing that when we first went on to online learning. We just wanted to give a couple weeks so that we could work out some of the bugs, so that the comments are based on more real data in terms of how people are experiencing online. So
got it.
So
and then the second one is the return preferences,
Yes.
how comfortable people are.
Yes, and we will lay out guidelines as a part of that too, because we, you know, once a family makes a decision, we want to make sure that, you know, we have some guidelines with regard to what those decisions are in terms of committing to one way or the other.
Right. And for that return survey, the resurvey of parents, we got some feedback last time in terms of clarifying definitions, providing, and we've lived it now, so people hopefully do have a better understanding of what some things look like. But I'm hoping we're going to address some of those concerns in terms of how we're asking those questions.
Correct.
And Steve, does the cohorting, or do you plan on the cohorting also involving transportation planning? So I understand like doing the cohorts within the classes and within the schools, but will that also be part of our transportation planning?
Yes.
And on the timeline question again, so if you're bringing a recommendation to us on September 28th, which is our next board meeting, it's our second board meeting of September, that would give us the opportunity at our first board meeting in October 12th, to, as a board, potentially accept that recommendation or not. And from that point, that's when the 2 to 3 week phase in would essentially launch. Is that correct?
Correct.
Hold on a second, because I was under a different impression that when you make that recommendation, if whatever that recommendation may be, would we vote on that recommendation on the September 28th? Or do we have to, I don't understand the waiting until October 12th.
Well, the board would have to vote on it, but it would have the timeline already embedded in that. So let's just say that, you know, that it would be that we were going to start back on October 15th or whatever that date might be. Those dates could already be will be established as a part of my recommendation. So the board would, you know, will have time to be able to get those dates in line, if that makes sense.
Thank you. That's actually a really good clarification, Tracy. So,
Okay.
so even if we don't vote on the 12th, we could potentially be moving in the direction to start by that following Monday, for
Correct.
example.
Correct.
My understanding, and I could be wrong because I'm still trying to make sure I understand the legislation that was passed last month, but part of that requires us every month to kind of confirm what our plan is for schooling, whether it's all online or hybrid or whatever it is. Is that correct, Steve?
Yes, and it gives us insurances of both plans. So it doesn't say like each month you don't have to tell what you're doing. You're basically just refining. Like we in the document that you'll see, it talks about online learning. It also talks about a hybrid method. So
so in 2 weeks we'll have to vote on that for that because it's due at the end of September, correct?
Yeah, the board doesn't have to actually vote on that.
Okay.
It just has to be submitted by the 1st. So we'll be presenting it on the 28th, and then we'll be presenting it to the ISD by the 1st.
Okay.
And Molly, I think the first presentation is October 1st. So it's after that the board has to monthly affirm.
Got it. Okay.
What it is we're doing. But let me also understand, Steve, what you think you're presenting to us as the plan, because in some respects for me, the plan is all about hybrid learning and how it is we effectively achieve that and logistically. And then the health risk data about whether or not we are at a place in our county where the health department advises that you fall in one of these risk levels and then you can support hybrid learning is almost a separate piece from the plan, because that's going to be variable as to what risk level we're in. So what are you envisioning? Are you envisioning that the plan you present is going to incorporate whatever risk level the Ingham County says we're at on September 28th?
Correct. And that could change, as you mentioned. So we want to, there's two pieces. The hybrid plan needs to be in place. We need all the protocols in place to do that. And we pretty much have that ready to go, because that was part of the response to returning plan that we had as a part of those different scenarios that we had to have approved prior to the new legislation. So we want to have that piece in place, and then we want to assess the data to decide, is the timeline that we put in place going to support the data in terms of risk at that particular time.
Because in part for me, Steve, since the health department has kind of put together this matrix that has risk levels for the county and then what you can support based on whether you have cases or no cases or transmission in your buildings. You know, it almost seems like the biggest part of our job is the hybrid plan and what that looks like, and then simply matching the pieces of that plan to whatever category Ingham County has placed us in.
That's correct.
And the hybrid model, if anybody who is watching wants to go back and look at our previous presentations that you've done, Steve and Susan, that hybrid plan is really thorough from my point of view. And there's been a lot of legwork already done on that. So that part is a good start.
Any other questions? All right.
All right, then I think we can go on to the discussion item number 3, recommendation to purchase Chromebooks and Chrome management licenses. Mr. Casson, I'm guessing we're going to hear from you.
Yes, you are. Thank you very much. I am making a recommendation tonight for the purchase of 450 Chromebooks, touchscreen Chromebooks. As I indicated in the memo to the board, this is typically a purchase I would bring to the board for approval in the spring. In fact, this past spring, I made the recommendation for 750 Chromebooks. But currently, and really ever since about May, there has been a very long delay or back order on Chromebook devices and really a lot of mobile devices. And right now, the estimate on Chromebooks is 4 to 5 months or even more is the back order on the Chromebooks. Typically, when we purchase these, I purchase it when the statewide device purchasing program window opens, which is April 15th. That's why we purchase them each spring. That purchasing window stays open until September 30th of each year. And so with my recommendation tonight for discussion and possible approval on September 28th at the next board meeting, we could still purchase these Chromebooks and take advantage of that discounted pricing from the state. Again, the idea is we would receive these shortly after the first of the year, January, February time frame, as opposed to waiting until next spring when there very possibly could be some long delays still at that time on mobile devices where we may or may not get the devices in time for the start of the next school year. So I am recommending the purchase of 450 touchscreen Chromebooks. They would be used at Wilkshire for our kindergarten and first grade students, as we've determined that touchscreen devices for them would be very beneficial. The price on the statewide purchasing program for those 450 Chromebooks and licenses is about $97,800. I guess one other thing I'd like to point out is we have shifted to this one-to-one purchase, or this one-to-one device student to device to student ratio. And because of that, we actually have to purchase fewer Chromebooks. Typically, I've been coming to you with a recommendation for about 750 Chromebooks per year. We will not need that many devices because we're going one-to-one. We don't need a cart of 30 in every classroom. And so rather than making a recommendation for 750 like we had scheduled or had planned to make next spring, we're really only in need of the 450 at this time.
So Jeff, these don't take the place of the 700 and some we approved in the spring.
No, the board approved that in early April. That purchase was made in mid-April when the device purchasing program opened. We received those Chromebooks towards the end of May, I believe, and those are actually in the hands of our students right now, those 750 devices. So this is really next spring's purchase that I'm making a recommendation to purchase now to avoid potential long delays in receiving the product next year, assuming this back order, this backlog of mobile devices continues.
Thank you.
Well,
Jeff?
yes.
So do you foresee us needing to recommend to purchase more in the spring, or is this really to cover that entire spring purchase, at least to our knowledge right now?
This is to cover the entire spring purchase. So I guess to explain a little bit further, when our plan was to have one cart of 30 Chromebooks in each classroom, we would need to cover about 125 classrooms or 124 classrooms. And so because of that, we would need a total number of about 3,700 Chromebooks in the district. With this shift to one-to-one, where each student gets a device with approximately 2,700 students in the district, we're going to need much fewer in terms of Chromebooks, assuming we move forward with the one-to-one plan. So this would cover us for next spring and actually for the 2021-22 school year, this purchase of 450.
Thank you.
Any other questions? So this will be an action item on our next board meeting. So the September 28th board meeting, as was mentioned.
Thank you.
All right, we are now at board reports. Let's go with policy and personnel. I know you've got a lot to talk about tonight.
So we discussed the the goals and the plans that we're required to submit to the ISD, which Associate Superintendent Jillings went over earlier in our meeting, including that timeline and how we're supposed to report progress. And again, those needs for us to reconfirm our learning plans every month. We talked about back to school, how things had gone. This was just a few days in. How things are going with the online environment, all the technology support that Mr. Casson and his department were providing to our families and to our teachers to make sure that it was working as well as possible. And also talked about really what it would take then to transition to a hybrid model when we're ready to do that. We had an update on the bond, including the update that Mr. Cook gave regarding some of the challenges around flooring and the issues with the delays there. We had an update on staffing in our district. And some of the moves that some of our teachers did over the summer. And then we also had a discussion around our Neola policy recommendations, mostly an update that Associate Superintendent Jillings and I were going to be meeting with the Neola rep last week, about a week after our committee meeting, and also that I'm working on a flow chart that will hopefully help to explain the whole procedure that we go through as a committee and then to the board when we're making recommendations for changes in policies to answer the questions that Mr. Mashad has brought up. We also discussed about some of the proposed language changes to policy 2210, which were originally brought to us from Hazlitt Voices for Change, and how we want to make sure we're working with that group so that the language that we adopt at some point reflects their interests as well as really our policy, what we need to have in our policy, and making sure that that everybody's in agreement that the language is in the appropriate place and that it reflects all of our goals. Because of that, and because there's been lots of feedback from board members, we are pulling that one back, and I'm working on some language changes that should be available to all board members in board docs in the next couple of days. The changes are based on conversations with some of the members, and I'll reach out to all of you once the changes are available to get more feedback, but also to get the feedback from our representatives from Hazlitt Voices for Change. So we will reintroduce those proposed changes to policy 2210, hopefully in the near future, as we continue to work on the language. That's it.
Thank you. Any questions from board members? We'll move on to finance and facilities. Ms. East.
Yeah, you know, our agenda was very, very similar. So we got a similar opportunity to discuss the extended learning plan with the administrators, and the back to school update and the bond update, and where we were with our construction projects and what had caused some of our delays and difficulties, and the staffing update, and the Neola policy discussion. And our committee also discussed some of the processes we might use when a policy is generated by the board versus being a policy recommended by Neola to stay compliant with legal requirements. So, you know, we look forward to having further conversation about that as well. And so that's kind of what we had on our committee.
Great. Any questions? All right. Well, speaking of Hazlitt Voices for Change, Ms. Jillings, hoping you can give us a little update on some of the behind the scenes work that's being done.
Yeah, so I just have a brief update. Molly had already talked about the board policy 2210 and how we're progressing on that. So we're just waiting to finalize some of that stuff. And then we are also going to set up a meeting with the some of the representatives from that committee, and with John Yoon from MSU, who is going to help us work on the survey, look at the survey that they had sent out earlier, and that's the survey that they brought the information to our administrative team and to the board because we want to make sure that the questions that they're asking are effective questions that'll get the kind of the types of information that we're looking for to make effective change. So they have agreed to sit with John and myself and kind of consult on those survey questions before we deploy that to our K-12 students. So we'll get that set up in the next week or two and then go from there.
Very good. Any questions on that? All right, so we are now at items from board members.
I think I just want to echo some of what Superintendent Cook said, thanking our staff, our teachers for all the work that they've been doing. I know it hasn't been easy. You know, it's challenging in lots of different ways, and I want to thank our parents. You know, it's a lot of work. I know several of you talked about having your kids at home. I also have 3 kids home, and my husband and I are working from home. So there are challenges. Some days are harder than others. But I do want to thank, at least in my experience, the teachers for my children who have been responsive to emails and to questions, to the other staff in the schools who have been responsive, helping to solve tech problems or just answer kind of basic questions. I know I've had emails from some of our teachers at like 10, 11 o'clock at night because they want to make sure we've got the information before the next morning. So I know everybody's putting in a lot of effort, a lot of hours to try and make this work. So I just wanted to say thank you, and that it's seen and it's known.
Just to echo Molly's sentiments there, yes. Great appreciation for the teachers there that are being really successful at this. But in the same breath there, I also just want to come back around to those parents here who address their concerns with the special ed needs. You know, we and their special needs children there with Ms. Johnston, Ms. Giddings, Mr. Goldberg, Ms. Marvel, and Ms. Laraga. There's 5 parents that have come to us as a board here tonight. And when we receive statements such as children are an afterthought, that should resonate with all of us as a board, because that is our #1 goal, to make sure the students' needs are being met. So I just want to make it a priority within the board here in our upcoming subcommittee meetings that this does get on our agenda, and that we focus on getting this issue fixed. Because for me, when we have this outcry from our parents, and you can hear it in their voices, that this should be fixed as soon as possible.
And I will second what Greg said. I was going to ask, I was relatively confident that our administrators would put it on our agenda, but we need to have follow-up and reporting about the surveys that are going to be going out, but also what is happening with the special needs programming and how the 2 hours is working and what the plans are for perhaps being able to do a bit more than that. But also I want to alert the board as well. I think there is still a lot to be done with coordination and collaboration with Ingham County on a return plan. And I'm hoping that through the ISD and in conjunction with Ingham County, that there can be some tabletop exercises with our administrators in the county to kind of work through what will happen when a case occurs, and particularly what will happen with communication, because while the county is responsible for doing the contact tracing, the school districts are going to be the conduit for communication to our community about what is happening within a given case. And it's going to be very difficult, and it's going to have to be done quickly. And I'm hoping there can be some conversation and work in advance to ready everybody for that, because it is going to need to be done in confidence, keeping the confidentiality of the case, and yet informing our community adequately. And the county will be responding with guidance that will differ on a case-by-case basis as to what they judge the circumstances to be. And so our community is going to have to be prepared and understand that they might get strikingly different communications from us on one case to the next. And we're going to have to be prepared for that as well.
Thank you. Other board member comments? Well, I actually have a couple. One is, thank you, Greg, Karen, everybody. I don't want the community to think, and I too echo the thank yous and the appreciation to our staff, to our community, to our administrators, but I don't want anyone to think that we're resting on our laurels or that we're satisfied that everything is going perfectly, because obviously there are glitches. We need to do better in some areas. Sounds like the special ed situation in particular has been challenging. I don't want people to think that any of our students are afterthoughts. That is heartbreaking. There are unique challenges to bringing any of the students back in person, and then we recognize that the educational, the IEPs and the learning modalities, et cetera, for some of our students add additional challenges. So again, I don't want anyone to think because we're saying thank you and we're so appreciative that for the things that are going well, that we're not recognizing that there is definitely room for improvement in other areas. Special ed in Hazlitt Public Schools has always been a point of pride, actually. People have come to our district because we have traditionally done a very good job. So we need to make sure that we are living up to our own standards. And I think that I'll end there. My other comment, I actually want to thank representatives from the Hazlitt Foundation for Schools who actually met with Superintendent Cook and I recently. It was a wonderful conversation in terms of the role the foundation may or may not be able to play in terms of supporting our return to school response plans. The foundation is a fundraising arm. They traditionally raise funds for supplemental activities. They do scholarships for graduating seniors. They have made many grants available to our teachers in the past for unique programs, both curricular and extracurricular. And they recognize, as we all do, that these are different times and that the needs are different within the district, both in the classroom level as well as district-wide. So I appreciate the conversations that we've had with the foundation members and their openness to look at their fundraising. In fact, even their ask, if you will, their annual solicitation, and how that ask might be able to tap into very specific district needs. Anything else from anybody? We've heard from most, but I don't want to assume that anyone's done. All right, then we will go to our action item. I did talk with Superintendent Cook. We decided to put the policy agenda, the policy change, excuse me, as an action item on the agenda rather than a consent agenda item, to give us a little more time to, again, just reiterate the fact that we have, over the last couple of meetings, been discussing 3 policies, and we're now, we have decided to table one of those, as was mentioned, I forget the number, 2210, which is related to curriculum within the district. And again, that it's not that we're not planning to change that. We do still support adding language about the importance of inclusivity and cultural sensitivity, but we wanted to be deliberate in both the language changes that are being made, as well as literally the formatting and the bulleting of that curriculum, since so much of the existing language is tied to specific legislation. So for members of the community who are looking for that 2210, that's why, again, it's not on here for a vote this month, because we did determine we wanted to make some changes, which then restarts the clock on having to do the first and second readings again. But we are still poised to take a vote on both a revision, a new policy, and then a rescission, a deletion of a policy related to Title IX. And again, that's legislatively required language. So I would entertain a motion. We could probably combine those. A motion to rescind policy 551702 and to add new policy 2266.
So I will move that we adopt as a new policy 2266 and that we rescind policy 5517.02.
I will
We have a
second.
motion. That was a second by East. All right, we have a motion and a second. Any, since this is an action item, any questions or comments before we move to the vote?
And I just wanted to say as a reminder, the reason that we are introducing a new policy and rescinding the old one is because the changes in Title IX and in the language from the U.S. Department of Education were really extensive, that it was more straightforward and easier and probably a better policy making practice to adopt a new policy that reflects that guidance than it was to try to edit the old one. So that's why we're adopting a new and rescinding the old. That's the recommendation.
Thank you for that clarification. Any other comments or questions? Then I will move to a roll call vote. Treasurer East?
Yes.
Vice President Polverento?
Yes.
Trustee Maury?
Yes.
Trustee Mashad?
Yes.
Secretary Wheeler?
Yes.
Trustee Collins?
Yes.
And Lemmer, I vote yes as well. So the motion carries. We will then move on to our consent agenda, some pretty basic things this time around. We have item number 1, approval of minutes of the August 24th, 2020 regular board meeting. We have item number 2, approval of minutes of the September 3rd, 2020 policy and personnel committee meeting. Item number 3, approval of the minutes from the September 3rd finance and facilities committee meeting. And item number 4, the United States Constitution proclamation. As mentioned by Superintendent Cook, acknowledging that the week of September 17th through September 23rd, 2020 is to be recognized as Constitution Week. Does anyone need any of those items pulled for clarification or questions? Seeing or hearing no requests, I will entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda items.
Tammy, I will move approval of the consent agenda.
Motion by East, do we have a second?
I second.
Second by Maury, thank you. We've said no questions, comments, so we'll move to a vote. I'll do a roll call again. Trustee Collins.
Yes.
Secretary Wheeler.
Yes.
Trustee Mashad.
Yes.
Trustee Maury.
Yes.
Vice President Polverento.
Yes.
Treasurer East.
Yes.
And Lemmer, I vote yes as well. Motion carries. Then we have just a couple of announcements. We have a Policy and Personnel Committee meeting that has been scheduled for September 23rd at 9 a.m. It will be scheduled currently to be held in the boardroom of the administration building to allow for social distancing with just the 4 or 5 people who will be in the room. A Finance and Facilities Committee meeting has been scheduled for September 23rd at 10:30 a.m. So the first group's going to clear out and the second group will come in, also being held in the boardroom of the administration building. Our next regularly scheduled Board of Education meeting will be held on Monday, September 28th at 7 p.m. That meeting will be held remotely. Our interest continues to be high, and for that we're grateful for our community members and our participation. But that does mean that we need to continue to meet remotely. And then finally, the Michigan Association of School Boards 2020 Delegate Assembly has been scheduled for Thursday, November 5th. That meeting will in fact be held virtually instead of the traditional in-person venue. As a reminder, the annual leadership conference is also being held that weekend for folks who are looking for their board certification workshop credits. The assembly is open to all, and there's no limit to how many board members may attend. No voting will occur, so we don't need to designate a delegate, but MASB is interested in knowing in advance who is participating. So if you do want to participate, please contact Michelle and let her know, and she'll help get us all registered to participate in that delegate assembly. Phew. All right, those were a lot of announcements. Appreciate everybody's patience. I will, seeing no additional agenda items, entertain a motion for adjournment for the evening. Any new voices?
I motion for adjournment.
All right, motion by Mashad. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Second by Wheeler. Wonderful. Any questions or comments? Hearing none. Motion to adjourn. Treasurer East.
Yes.
Vice President Paul Varento.
Yes.
Trustee Maury.
Yes.
Trustee Mashad.
Yes.
Secretary Wheeler.
Yes.
Trustee Collins.
It looks like she's muted.
You want a thumbs up to, there we go. May the record reflect she voted yes for adjournment of the evening, as do I. We are adjourned, everybody. Thank you very much.